Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1936 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Luise Rainer won for her performance in The Great Ziegfeld. But why did she beat fellow nominees Irene Dunne, Gladys George, Carole Lombard, and Norma Shearer? We'll explore all this and more on today's episode of And the Runner-Up Is. Hello and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 9th year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1936. We'll be discussing why Luise Rainer won, why the losers lost, and why we think the runner-up of this Best Actress race was the runner-up. This is the final year where the Academy revealed who it was. We'll talk about it in a little bit. But my guest today is truly always a thrill to talk with on the show. She is the creator of the Be Kind Rewind YouTube channel, which has actually covered a number of Best Actress races, among other great pop culture video essays. Please welcome back to the show, Izzy.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Of course, yes. You are obviously one of my key people that I wanted to have on this Best Actress show, given your knowledge. So thank you so much for agreeing to do it.
Oh, of course. It's my pleasure.
Well, before we talk about 1936, I would like to put you on the record here with your take on Best Actress as a category. Mm-hmm. I imagine people are interested in your personal taste. So what is your favorite Best Actress win of all time?
You know, that's very difficult to answer.
Mm-hmm.
If I had to choose one, though, I think I would pick Liza Minnelli in Cabaret.
Ooh.
Yeah.
And why is that?
I just think that it's such a beautifully performed film all the way around. And I'm just, I think, so much a personal fan of hers. Like anything that she does, I will watch it. I love Liza with a Z, all of that stuff. So all of the technical skills that she brings to the table are so wonderful and so enchanting to me. So yeah, I just love her in that. And that is one of my favorite movies. So just the combination of the two is, I think, why.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful star performance. I love a star performance.
Mm-hmm.
And I also just love that category in general with Diana Ross and Cicely Tyson. It's
Absolutely.
a very good group.
A very competitive year.
Yeah. Well, my other question for you is, what is your most heartbreaking loss in Best Actress? One of those times where you were just, devastated or confused when someone just didn't end up winning.
Well, I certainly was not alive for this one, but, keeping it in the family, I will say that Judy Garland in 1954 will always be confusing and sad to me. I wish she'd have won for the incredible performance she gave in A Star is Born, but alas, I guess no one else in Hollywood felt that way. So I guess we live with the tragic consequences of their decisions today.
That's true. A very common answer, I will say. You haven't heard any episodes yet, but that is a very common answer. Truly heartbreaking loss. I love that you kept it in the family there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about this very interesting year at the Oscars, the 9th Academy Awards. As I said last week, this is the official cementing of 5 nominees in this category. Thank God we have an even 5 now, which has stuck all the way to the modern era. And the nominees were Irene Dunne for Theodora Goes Wild, Gladys George for Valiant Is the Word for Carrie, Carole Lombard for My Man Godfrey, Luise Rainer for The Great Ziegfeld, and Norma Shearer for Romeo and Juliet, with the winner being Luise Rainer. So, Izzy, what would you say really stands out to you about this lineup when you look at it collectively?
Collectively, I think what's interesting is we're sort of in this moment where screwball comedy is very prominent, and you don't often see a lot of nominees for comedy these days. But I like that there's this moment where we have two show-stopping comedic performances from Irene Dunne and Carole Lombard, and sort of like contrasting with maybe more traditional Oscar type roles in the category. And I think a lot of people today, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, would look most favorably upon these two performances. So it's very interesting to sort of think about the concept of comedy being respected by the Academy. Yeah, it's maybe that could happen again. Who knows? But yes, that's what I tend to think about when I think about this year.
Yeah, well, generally speaking, I actually really like this lineup. There's really only one that I would say that probably shouldn't be there, kind of a wasted nomination, but we'll get to that. But I love that we're gradually trending upward in that regard. I love that we have multiple screwball comedy performances nominated. I do think it's very reflective of this new trend of these kinds of films being popular. We still have a more traditional old guard pick, like you said, with Norma Shearer. But on the whole, I think this is actually a fun lineup to watch. Like, even Luise Rainer delivering more of a dramatic performance still has those lighter, fun moments, and Gladys George, same thing. So I would say that this is a classic Best Actress lineup that, for those who haven't watched a lot of classic films, that you would probably enjoy more than others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think that's fair.
So let's just get right to it. One other thing to note about this is the voting this year for the nominating phase. Instead of the whole membership deciding the nominees, there was only a committee of 50, which, by the way, included Carole Lombard and William Powell. So, yeah, but it's a very small group voting on the nominees, and like I said at the top, the Academy had this one last year of revealing who the runners-up were, and they revealed the third placers as well, which I can just say now that the third placer was Norma Shearer, and the runner-up was Carole Lombard. So we'll talk more about why they were more in contention than Irene Dunne and Gladys George towards the end, but first, let's just break down these performances individually, starting with Irene Dunne for Theodora Goes Wild. So excited that I'm now at the Irene Dunne screwball comedy era. Starting off with Cimarron for her was bleak, but here we are. This is actually her first comedy role in Theodora Goes Wild. She was apparently very apprehensive about it at first, but she basically had to do it because of her contract. And she plays, of course, Theodora, who is a woman in a very small puritanical town in Connecticut, and she happens to have written a very salacious book that's flying off the shelves, and she wrote it under a pseudonym, Caroline Adams, so no one in town knows that it's her, and she goes to New York to visit her publisher, and that's where she meets the illustrator of the book, Michael, played by Melvin Douglas. He ends up being pretty smitten with her, and he follows her back to her town, and they become romantically involved. She mentions that she loves him, and he's like, nope, and he just flees back to New York. And then she goes off and finds him, where she actually finds out that he has a wife who he's estranged from. So naturally, conflict ensues. That's the film. I'd never seen this before, but I'm such a fan of Irene Dunne, and I love the title. It's very instantly evocative for me, that I was very excited to watch this, and I had a lot of fun with it. What were your thoughts on Irene Dunne here and Theodora Goes Wild?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love this performance so much. I think it pairs really well. Like if you did a double bill with The Awful Truth, it just really demonstrates her comedic skills so well. Yeah, I was trying to think of what they would title it today. Maybe it's like Theodora Goes Off, or like Theodora Snaps.
Theodora Snapped. Yeah.
I think this is a really interesting and fun film overall, just sort of how it's positioning like a new generation against like a Victorian one. It's really interesting to kind of view through that lens, but I think Irene Dunne is sort of the perfect person to put in that situation because she can play very convincingly in the first half of the film, like, yes, I am. I'm so, conservative and I don't want to rock the boat too much. But the minute she snaps, she can turn into this like beautiful, extravagant, wild child who's like wearing ostrich feathers around, and is, dancing up a storm every night. I just think she has this sort of like sing-songy type of humor that is, I mean, in some ways, like literally, because they always find an excuse to make her sing, but like, but just like a sort of melodic delivery that I find so enthralling. And it's really displayed very nicely in this film. So I love it, and I'm always very excited when I get to watch it.
Yes, I very much enjoyed this performance and this film. I think even with this being her first comedy, she shows some really smart comedic instincts and timing and line delivery. It's all there instantly for her, especially towards the latter half of the film where she really, goes off. Which, can I just say, it's really nice to say that I can say that her best stuff comes towards the end, because I'm encountering a lot of performances and films in doing this series where the most interesting element happens towards the beginning and then it just gradually turns into something that's either generic or way over the top melodramatic in a bad way, or having some kind of like a false happy ending where the lead actress has to have, a false happy ending with the lead actor, even if it's definitely not earned. But this I really enjoy from start to finish. I think she really does build her performance in a very intentional way, and she totally makes the most of it. Obviously playing her with more cautiousness when she's in her hometown, gradually opening up, like that scene where she gets drunk with Michael is great.
Yeah.
And then, her sort of snapping back into reality when he makes a pass at her. For that beginning to middle portion of the film, it's this awakening, for this woman who is stuck in this very oppressive town in Connecticut. Listen, I'm from Connecticut, so I get it.
Yeah.
I understand this situation that she's in, that is just very gossipy, and she's released this book that's very scandalous. She has this sort of adventurous side to her, and this is an awakening for her. So I guess more than anything else, I just find the arc of the film to be really fun to watch her have that awakening and end in a very happy and a very confident place compared to like 80% of the other actress nominees that I've covered. So,
Yeah, and I think the movie kind of works so well because it gives each of the leads sort of like an equal playing time, in the sense that like the first half is sort of her being disturbed by Melvin Douglas. I mean, disturbed and also like falling in love with him. And then the second half, the roles switch. So she becomes not only the aggressor, but also the like disturber of the peace, so to speak. And it's nice to see them like sort of evenly go head to head in that way. So it doesn't feel just like he's this annoying guy who's following her, because I feel like that could very easily just feel intrusive and maybe a little too aggressive. But when it switches, you kind of allow yourself to be like, oh, okay, this is fine. Like she has power in this situation too.
Yeah. And it's like a lot of the great rom-com movies of this era, like The Awful Truth or It Happened One Night, that are really equal playing fields that I think have really thrived more than a lot of the others.
Yeah. And she's just so good at that too, where she is entering a situation where she's purposely trying to bother somebody. I think about moments in The Awful Truth that are very similar to this, where she can just sort of play this like very strange, eccentric figure who everyone is just kind of like, who is this woman? Why is she here?
What's her deal?
Like this?
Yeah.
And it's funny because like you don't think of her as a strange person or a strange actress, but she's so charming that it like comes off that way without you feeling like you're talking to someone who's totally off the rails.
Right. I like the scene where Michael is back in her hometown and he's in the guest house or whatever that is, and he's like whistling in this obnoxious way, and she retaliates by playing the piano and sort of singing, and the way she's like gritting her teeth through all of that is really fun. Again, really showing her personality. I mean, speaking to that relationship, I don't think it's the most electrifying chemistry necessarily that they have together, her and Melvin Douglas. I mean, he serves his purpose well enough. You could see why she might like him, but for me, this is a film where it's all about her, and I appreciate that the filmmakers trust her, with this being her first comedy, to really carry this arc all the way through.
Yeah. I kind of feel that way about all of Melvin Douglas's
Well, yeah.
like support, like male lead roles. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I feel that way with when he's with Garbo, certainly.
Yeah.
It just feels more about her. But I think she's my favorite cast mate or like co-lead with Cary Grant. So it's very
Yes.
difficult to have that in mind as you're watching her with other people because you're just like, oh, I wish it were Carrie.
Yeah, this is not the ideal, right?
Yeah.
Um, I was actually reading about the behind the scenes making of the film, and the director, who is Richard Bolslawski,
Mhm.
had some troubling methods to really get what he wanted. I read this from TCM, actually, the article they wrote on this film, which said Dunne was supposed to make an entrance appearing excited, but Boleslawski wasn't satisfied with her reactions, so he had a crew member fire blanks from a pistol just below Dunne's backside. Her entrance was appropriately flustered.
HR.
Yeah.
HR. Yeah,
But
wow.
it also goes on to say that Dunne recalled that Boleslawski was ill during much of the production, which tracks.
Yep. Yep.
Um,
Absolutely.
so that's a bit troubling. But in general, I really live for this performance. I love all of her fabulous outfits, like you said, that she suddenly starts wearing once she has all this newfound confidence. And she's just fully come out with, the fact that she's Caroline Adams and she's just living her best life and almost taking on a different tone of voice.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's almost like a dual performance when you think about it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think the screenwriters deserve a huge shout out too.
Mm-hmm.
I think the one of them, Sydney, I don't know how to say his last name. Is it Buchman, maybe?
Sounds
Um,
right.
but he wrote a lot of like really great female romantic comedies, female
Mm-hmm.
led, that I mean, it's nice to see and like give credit when it's like somebody is continually just giving like really nice characters to women. Love that.
Yeah.
So just got to call it out.
Yeah. Important in this
Yes.
era for sure. The ending, I think, is fantastic, I must say, where
Mhm.
she's getting this huge welcoming party back home, and everyone in town has come to welcome her back, and she arrives with a newborn baby, and it just totally rocks the town. She goes back to the house, and Michael is there and waiting for her, and he tries to, again, literally run away from this responsibility that it might be his kid. And she reveals that this is actually the baby of one of the people in town, and gives it to the baby's grandmother, who just so happens to be the biggest sort of gossip in town, and showing her to be a bit of a hypocrite. And I like just the fact that Theodora isn't punished for the things that she does,
Mhm.
which, obviously writing this salacious book and I guess breaking up marriages,
Yeah.
having this wild side, and I feel like in a lot of these kinds of films you would expect some sort of like a humbling moment or have her be punished in some way, but she kind of gets to have her cake and eat it too.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too because it feels almost pre-code without being pre-code, if
Right.
that makes sense. Like
Yeah.
like it wants you to feel scandalized or think that something like illicit is happening, but at the same time nothing salacious really is happening because it's like they make the stakes very clear where it's like, oh, she's intruding on this marriage, but actually they're not really in love, so it's fine. Like
Right.
there are
Right.
always these qualifications where it's like, oh, she's having this baby, but they're secretly married, so it's fine. And so it's sort of like setting things up to feel scandalous, and so you understand why people would feel so bothered by what she's doing in her hometown, but it's also like just safe enough for the audience that we also don't feel that way, which
Yeah.
is interesting.
And that speaks to what we've been talking about a little bit in this era where the Hays Code has come into effect now
Mhm.
suddenly. And filmmakers are really having to try to adapt these stories in a way that goes just far enough without obviously going too far to
Mhm.
bump up against the censors. And I
Mhm.
think this is an example of a film that is weirdly sort of thriving in more of those innuendos, I guess.
Yeah, because even the excerpt that they read from the book was just not, it's not scandalous. It's like they
Right.
maybe kiss or like hug.
Yes.
And so maybe that just serves to emphasize how conservative, like unfairly conservative the town is, I guess. Um,
Right.
but yeah, it's very interesting.
And I mean, it is an interesting setup where these more conservative, puritanical people are very clearly depicted as the villains here,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
And you would think that that sort of sensibility is more in keeping with these censors to begin with. And it's kind of wild that the film was even made at all, I would say,
Yeah, that's
in this
true.
current form.
Yeah.
So,
This was
love that.
Columbia, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Maybe it'd be a little different if it were MGM. I feel like they would have reined
Yeah.
in things a little bit more.
They kept a tight ship there. But
Mhm.
let's just look at a few things from the time. Yeah, well, one thing is from the censor, I believe, they said that the heroine Theodora exemplifies evil made to appear attractive after she breaks up the two marriages. All the decent and church going characters are made to appear ridiculous, stupid, and silly when compared with their city counterparts who, quote, indulge in extramarital activities, drunkenness, and debauchery and are made to appear attractive.
Mhm.
So that's what the discussion was at the
Also,
time.
this is totally out of left field. I apologize for
Mm-hmm.
that, but can we talk about the set design?
Yeah,
Because it was so smart. The way that they made the house in Connecticut and the old church just look ancient and sort of like designed from in the past. And then you
yeah,
go to Manhattan, you go to Melvin Douglas's apartment, and it's like gorgeous, like Art Deco, Bauhaus sculpture and things like that. And I thought that was so smart and just like a really cool way of emphasizing that difference
yeah. A
between the
very clear
two.
contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah, and those early scenes, I was even thinking while watching it, like, does this take place in like the 1800s? Like,
Right. Yeah.
it
Because they're
feels
all buttoned
so
up.
old fashioned,
Hmm.
like aggressively so. Yeah, a very good contrast. That's pretty much what I've got on Irene Dunne in this film, unless you had anything else.
No, no.
All right. Well, let's move on to our next nominee, Gladys George, for Valiant Is the Word for Carrie, one of my favorite titles that I've encountered yet. So she is playing a woman named Carrie Snyder, who is a prostitute in a small southern town. She's sort of seen as the town pariah, and people want her to leave their community. But she befriends this young boy named Paul, who has a rough childhood. And eventually, Carrie leaves town, and Paul actually runs away to be with her after both of his parents die. He meets a young girl named Lady along the way, and they're both essentially adopted by Carrie as they live in the city. And she creates a laundry business that becomes a big success. And then both Paul and Lady are all grown up, and Paul accidentally causes a guy to be killed. And he feels guilty about it, so he befriends this guy's sister, who is actually only really after their family money. So Carrie tries to get her to go away, essentially, with some rather tragic results. It's another film about a fallen woman and a mother who's sacrificing herself for her children. I guess in this case, like surrogate children. A very melodramatic plot. This is a kind of film that feels very familiar to me, again, having gone through 8 other years before this. It's such a wild plot. Izzy, what's your take on Gladys here and her one and only Oscar nomination?
um, I actually liked this performance.
Mm-hmm.
I think at this time she was playing kind of a lot of roles like this, right? Like she was in Madam X, which is very similar to me, that movie.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Just in terms
Yeah.
of like the scale of it, and also, the sex worker makes good kind of feel, and like confronting her son and all of these kinds of things. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, yes, I actually very much liked this performance. I think the film is a little harder to get through. It's much longer than I anticipated it being.
Yeah.
But it was good. I mean, I don't know very much about Gladys George's career, like as a
Yeah.
whole. It seems like it's a sort of consists of a lot of supporting characters. Like I was looking through her IMDb and I recognized so many of the films and I was like, why don't I know more about her? It was kind of strange. But anyways, yes, I thought she sort of transitioned really well through the different eras that they were playing, sort of in the beginning being younger and fresher and then becoming an older woman later on. And yeah, I enjoyed
Mm-hmm.
it.
Well, like you, I sort of had encountered her only in these supporting roles.
Mm-hmm.
She has things like The Maltese Falcon is a big one, and The Best Years of Our Lives even before this, but I can't really say I remembered a whole lot about those performances.
Right.
So I went into this pretty green in terms of expectations of her as a performer, but I did find her pretty good in this role. I thought she brought a lot of character to the part. I admit that I found her a lot more compelling in the beginning
Mm-hmm.
before she leaves town, and I had almost hoped that the story would sort of stay there because after a certain point, after the big time jump, it becomes a lot more generic for me. But what I love in the beginning is how she really is imbuing this role with a sense that she's truly just lived a life, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
The timbre of her voice is a little deeper than the average actress of this era, I think. And she's young, but you can sense that she's been through a lot, and she feels pretty bitter about this town that just hates her. And I think she's touched by this young kid who she probably relates to in terms of having a difficult life, and he also doesn't judge her. You know, he seems to really value her and respect her as a person, and she's very touched by that, and her face is very expressive. Her eyebrows actually remind me almost of like a Jean Harlow. Like the arch is very similar.
Mm-hmm.
That really complements her look almost in this very distinct way. So I really, my favorite part about this is the beginning portion more so than the later.
I definitely agree with that. And one of the things that I don't love about classic movies, admittedly, is like the child actor energy is like times a million. Do you know what I like? There's
Oh yeah,
definitely a child actor energy now, but back then it was like on steroids. Like it's a lot.
like the
Um,
gee whiz.
yeah, like shouldn't we go down the street? And it's just like too much. But what I loved about her performance in the beginning is like she remains very calm when she's talking to the child actors, in a way that I felt balanced it out really, really well and sort of like helps tone down those scenes quite a bit. And I was very thankful for that. I just thought she really maintained her character and also just like the tenor of the film in those moments.
Yeah, she balances it out well. I do think they actually do have a pretty nice screen presence together, the
Mm-hmm.
chemistry, that I feel like I understood their bond and that desire to be in a better place. But then we get to the middle and he runs off because, like I said, both of his parents have died at this point. And along the way, he meets this girl lady, like I said, and I'm a bit disturbed by her introduction because she was apparently won in a contest for a magazine. Did you understand what this was getting at?
I did not understand that part, but I'm like, okay, well, I feel like half the adopted babies at this time were probably stolen. Like, oh
Yeah.
God, it's just horrible to think about.
This is such a strange movie for me, or I guess I should say story, since this is based on a novel. Just a lot of bizarre choices, like the part where Paul is grown up and he's getting on the train and this guy is behind him wanting to get on, and Paul just like pushes him backwards, and that makes this guy get trapped and then run over by the train, and it all happens so fast.
Yeah.
And almost in like a matter-of-fact way that I had to actually rewind it and be like, what exactly was happening there?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced this a lot watching a lot of like the first 10 years of Oscar, but like truly one of the craziest things about movies from this time is like it can be 20 minutes and someone has like grown up, died, like their child has a new job, like they moved to Europe. It like all happens in
Yeah.
5 minutes. And sometimes that's great and sometimes it's awful. And like it's very hard to do well. And I'm not sure that this does it well, but I wasn't like turned off totally by it, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
But then it's like he feels so guilty about this whole thing, and he gets into this relationship with this guy's sister, Lily. And, honestly, at this point, I'm just like, isn't this supposed to be more about Carrie? I feel like we lost a plot with her a little bit, but that happens. She's from the wrong side of the tracks. She has a lover in jail, and she wants money from Carrie and her family, and there's this awkward love triangle happening too, where Lady also wants to be with Paul, but then Paul is feeling indebted to Lily. And like I said, Carrie doesn't do a whole lot here in the middle, not so much for Gladys George to do outside of just like concerned looks, I suppose.
Yeah. One thing I did think was interesting, because I didn't know much about Gladys George, so I started reading about her, and I realized like I think the youngest person in this category was Luise Rainer. Like it's interesting to me that like most of these women in the category this year, including Gladys, were like at least in their 30s, I think.
Yeah, I think they were all in their 30s, perhaps.
Which seems very like out of the ordinary almost.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much in the very early years, but like definitely in the 40s. Yeah, I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think they're all pretty young feeling in general.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think
Whatever
they're all
means.
very youthful, but I feel like
Yeah.
what's in the terms of a Hollywood definition of that, it's like,
That's
wow,
very
they
true.
thought someone 34 was worth a romance. Crazy.
Yeah.
Good for them.
Yeah. But the ending is kind of wild, where Paul is still feeling indebted, and Lily just wants him for his money, and Carrie wants to pay her off. So they end up coming with this scheme where it's like Lily's lover is in jail, and they try to break him out. And as they try to do this, Lily is shot and killed, and then Carrie is an accomplice. So she's just taken into custody, and she decides she wants to plead guilty, basically in order to protect the family and to make sure that their past doesn't come out of the woodwork. And there you have it. Valiant is the word for Carrie. It's the last line of the film.
There's
I'm like,
the punishment that we were looking for earlier.
Exactly. That's very much a great example of that.
Yep.
But I'm honestly still a little confused about what this plan even was towards the end, and how Carrie was supposed to really help her in this. Unless I'm forgetting something, it feels pretty vague, but I don't know. I feel like the film is trying to say something about Carrie with this ending, that she is this self-sacrificing kind of woman, and she's basically the archetype of the hooker with the heart of gold, and what an incredible, valiant woman she is. But
yeah, it's very Stella Dallas. It's like a woman is
Yes.
sort of supposed to suffer for her children.
right. But also the film for me is just so all over the place in terms of what it's focusing on. And like it goes off to be with Paul for a little while, and then, Lady has her own deal going on, and I just don't feel like it earns that sense of a journey for Carrie. The whole part of her becoming like a super successful businesswoman happens in like a blink of an eye, and I feel like it becomes just a little too unfocused for me
Mhm.
by the end, that I almost wonder if that influenced how I felt about her performance, which I think is good all the way throughout, but something feels missing for me.
Yes, I definitely agree with you. And I think this is so true of the era, just to sort of reiterate a lot of what we've been saying. It's like these adaptations, especially of novels or like very popular novels, become very rambly and like all over the place in a way where I feel like they would be more strictly adapted, maybe like even 10 years later. They tend to do a lot in a very short amount of time and are very unfocused.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading about it. This is based on a novel, and it turns out the ending of the novel and the end of the film are significantly different. And it's actually kind of rare because the novel actually ends on a more hopeful note than the film does, which is usually the opposite of the case. They do the jailbreak thing, and it actually works out. They don't get caught, and then we have Lily and her lover running off together, and Carrie goes back to the city, and eventually Paul and Lady get married, and then Carrie is just, raising her new grandson, and that's how it ends.
Great. Did they change it because of the code? Did you find that out?
I feel like I didn't need to read that to know that that was probably the case,
Yeah, that's very true.
if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think that would have been a probably better ending in
Yep.
general.
Yep. It's almost like the
So,
author thought it through. Kind of
yeah,
crazy.
right. Instead of just like going back and picking and choosing random plot points and reverse engineering some ending that doesn't work to make her
Exactly.
seem
Yes.
truly valiant. Yes. Ugh. Anything else on Gladys?
No, that's all I got.
All right. Well, let's move on to a big one here that we're both excited about. Carole Lombard for My Man Godfrey. So, this is the one and only time we can talk about Carole Lombard. This is her only nomination, despite a very interesting career. She first started out in films in the early 20s, and she signed on with Paramount in the 30s. She did some dramatic parts, but then she starred in 20th Century in 1934 and Hands Across the Table, and then My Man Godfrey. She was not the first choice for this. The studio actually wanted Constance Bennett. This is also another role that Miriam Hopkins could have had that did not go to her. We had some fun talking about all the great roles that Miriam Hopkins could have played that ultimately did not go to her in episodes past. But
And there's
William
more
Powell.
coming. That's fun too.
Exactly. Oh, yeah. But William Powell actually advocated for Carole, who was his ex-wife, by the way, pretty recently divorced. But they have incredible chemistry, so it still works out. And this film is obviously very influential screwball comedy with a great cast. And for those who don't know, Carole plays a young woman named Irene who belongs to a very rich family in New York City. And the family goes out on little scavenger hunts. And one of the items that they have to find is a forgotten man. So she finds this guy, Godfrey, down by the local dump where a number of homeless men are congregating. And he ends up just charming her to the extent that she hires him to be their new butler. So that happens, and Irene also has this sibling rivalry with her sister. She has a very eccentric mother, played by Alice Brady. Her father is just sort of putting up with all the craziness, but Irene discovers that there's more to Godfrey than she once thought, and she ends up falling in love with him. So yeah, this is obviously a classic. This is a film that is in the Criterion Collection, hailed as one of the great comedies of this era and, really of all time. So what are your thoughts on My Man Godfrey and Carole here?
So when we were DMing about this, I will tell your audience that I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I apologize in advance because this entire episode is just going to be me talking about how much I love Carole Lombard.
And now we come to
And
it,
now we're
yes.
here. So that should tell everyone how I feel about this performance. I am obsessed with it. I like immediately fell in love with her and with this movie the first time I saw it. I just think she is truly a genius of epic proportions when it comes to screwball comedies. It's almost hard to describe what she can accomplish in very simple moments. I'll give an example. There's a scene where she's just talking to Godfrey in the kitchen. It's a very, easy conversation that like you could play very straight and it would be fine. But the whole time she's like washing the same dish for like 10 minutes. And it's truly hilarious. And I don't know if that was written into the script, if it came from her brain, but it's just played so expertly. And I love like almost every minute of this movie. I mean, so here's the thing. Like if any of you have not seen My Man Godfrey, like you have no excuse. It's public domain at this point. It's everywhere.
Right.
It's on every streaming service. Please do yourself a favor, watch it. If you can get through the first 5 minutes, which I think may rub some of us the wrong way in terms of its class politics.
Yeah.
You can get through it. I promise. It's just very, very funny and like wild and eccentric, and nobody delivers lines like Carole Lombard does. And it's just a pleasure to hear what she says, spoken by her. So yes, I'm obsessed with this performance. She should have won. Putting my stake in the
Wow.
ground.
Okay.
Hands down.
Yeah, well, I love this movie. I love this performance. It's such a blast. Also, the film totally breezes by every time I watch it. And I actually do appreciate its commentary about the class systems and how there is a certain sect of society that really aren't affected by any of the downturn of the economy, and just how blissfully unaware that can make a person. Something that we still have in today's society. How the film is sort of making fun of this idea that prosperity is just around the corner. And I do think it does take some shots at the upper class, but it isn't too didactic. It isn't openly trying to preach in a way that makes films about these kinds of things kind of dull to watch, similar to what we were saying about It Happened One Night a few episodes ago. And it's a similar dynamic in this film where we do have this spoiled rich woman, this guy who's a lower class, who's sort of commenting on the ridiculousness of the upper class. But sort of like Claudette Colbert there, I think Carole Lombard has a very difficult task here of making her character not necessarily likable, but just understandable. I mean, there's a lot of silliness and over the top moments from her where she might not be relatable, quote unquote, especially to an audience watching this in 1936. But she feels so comfortable in this role, and her screen presence is so charming. Even when she's being totally clueless, and this is a kind of character that might be more on the annoying side in another actress's hands. But there's just kind of like a desperation here that she brings to the role, this desperation to be with Godfrey and to have her feelings validated, that I think all of this really, there's something beneath the surface here that she delivers that I'm always captivated by.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And I think she plays, like you said, the chemistry between her and William Powell is obviously amazing, but I think
yeah.
it's how she sort of slots into the whole family as well. Like I think Gail Patrick is incredible in this movie. She's sort of like an unsung hero of this movie a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
as like
Yeah.
the sort of resident, I guess, villain in the family, to a certain extent. How she's very like icy character, and so how the two of them interact with each other is also just so captivating. So yeah, I mean, it's also, it's hard to describe how many like physical gags are in this as well, and I think she also demonstrates that in 20th Century. So maybe they were just including those because they knew she could do them. I'm not sure about the making of this very much, but yeah, it's wonderful. I love it.
Yeah. And I do love that she actually does provide a lot of the best laugh out loud comedy moments in this film. Like, the scene where she's upset and her mother tells her little protege to act like a monkey because she knows she loves that, and he does it, and she's just continuing to sob while
Yeah.
she's looking at him. Just this really great comedic timing.
When she's like,
And
"What is food?" Like all of that kind of
yes,
like overly dramatic sulking. It's incredible.
yes, one of my faves is life is but an empty bubble.
Yes.
And going back to the whole monkey scene where I think it's that same scene where she's just like lying on the couch and everyone's left the room at this point, and Godfrey goes up to her and she's just like, I wasn't really having a spell. and she says it so quietly that he's like, I beg your pardon, and she has to just repeat herself like 3 times. I
Right.
love that scene. And I just love that look of satisfaction on her face. Like she's really got one over on her family.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it really is something about her delivery that is so interesting. Like there are no periods in a Carole Lombard paragraph. Like everything just is sort of strung together, but also delivered in a way where she'll say like, "Oh, and then we went over here and it was wonderful, and then la, 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 la," and it's like almost like she's singing a song.
Right.
And it's like enchanting. I don't know how else to describe it. Like you're like, oh, I need to listen to you because you are entertaining me as you speak instead of just like telling me whatever is in the script.
Right.
It's really cool.
It's a true performance.
Hmm.
And it's similar to what we were saying with Irene Dunne. That kind of musicality is
Hmm.
perfect for these kinds of films. And yeah, I mean, I love the moment where even a more dramatic line for her where she says, some people do what they want and it doesn't seem to make a difference, sort of thing. And I love that moment where she also just like quickly darts her eyes at Godfrey to see if what she's saying is working on him.
Hmm.
And obviously, what is food? It's just an all
Yes,
timer.
absolutely. The
But
shower is also
yes,
an
Godfrey
all-timer.
loves me. He put me in the shower. Iconic. There's also another very funny scene also there that she has with her sister who has decided to frame Godfrey for stealing her necklace. And then Carole Lombard, she has like this kind of mocking tone where she's like, Cornelia lost her pearls and I've got mine. In that very like sibling rivalry kind of way.
Yeah, she's very childlike in a way, I think, in a lot of
Yeah.
these roles. And it's interesting because, like, you compare it with that movie she was in with Cary Grant, which is so funny to me because I'm like, I can't believe Cary Grant and Carole Lombard were in a movie together and it's a drama. Like, what a waste. But yeah, where she just seems like so almost regal and like mature. I love that she can kind of turn that on and off depending on who she's playing.
She has the range.
Hmm.
But like in those kind of moments, like oddly enough, it made me want to see Carole Lombard in like a Little Women kind of story. I just feel like
Oh,
she works well with that kind of childlike sort of sister situation.
yeah, absolutely. That's really cool.
But then by the end of the film, I would say it doesn't seem like she's really learned her lesson, quote unquote. I think she remains pretty consistent throughout the film. Do you agree with that?
I would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like this is like a journey from her to become a more humble person. Like she certainly gets to that point
I
in some regard, but she
yeah,
doesn't change as a person.
I don't think anyone changes as a person except for maybe Godfrey,
Yeah,
but like only
exactly.
just, like it's not
Right.
really a transformation kind of script. I'll say that.
Yeah. Which I actually think is probably consistent with, the different class systems in general.
Mm,
Just saying.
yeah, that's actually a really great point.
you know, like I
Yeah.
feel like this rich family who've been through this humbling moment for them where they've almost lost all of their money by the end. They're going to end up okay no matter what, and they're just going to do what they always do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that's a nice sort of subtle undercurrent by the end.
But also almost like coming out better because they have Godfrey
Yeah.
and there's like this whole new business. So
Right.
it's like that also tracks with what we've learned over the past 2 years as well.
Exactly. Yeah. So truly watching this again, I was like, this is really resonating with me even more than I'd seen it in years past. But I do find the ending scene to be really fascinating because she goes down to the dump, the original place that she met Godfrey, which he's now created this nightclub called the Dump, and he's back to being successful again. And she's very quickly decided to marry him, and I love her sort of manic energy in that final scene.
Mm-hmm.
And also how there's a bit of ambiguity there in whether he really wants to be with her in the end,
Mm-hmm.
or if he's just sort of acquiescing to her. But either way, I think it's a fitting ending.
Yeah, she really steamrolls through that scene, and I think it's really funny. I love that you said it's kind of ambiguous because I always thought it was ambiguous too, but sort
Yeah.
of assumed that the film was trying to tell me he actually wanted it. But William Powell doesn't really play it like that, which I think is interesting.
Right. But I do think, regardless, that they're great together. Just the two actors themselves, but also these two characters.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is that she is, getting exactly what she wants. Even after all of that she's been through, like I said, because that's what happens to women like her sometimes in the end. So I think that's a very fitting and smart ending for her. But for Carole Lombard, I mean, sadly, her career was cut very, very short. Her last role was in To Be or Not to Be in 1942, which is the year that she died. She was only 33 when she died in a plane crash. But she was a really fascinating person. I'm sure you've read plenty about her.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's funny. I haven't had the chance to talk about her too much on the channel, but I would say she is one of my favorites.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that I've ever read about her is just so positive. Like she just seems like the smartest, most caring person in Hollywood. And just was an incredible businesswoman on top of being a great performer, great at branding and like marketing herself. Like her turn into screwball comedy was really a self-invention in a way. Like she pushed for that. And I think that, anytime I read about stories like that from women of that era, I'm very inspired by how they kind of took on a very difficult system and found a way to make their vision work. So, yeah, she's just wonderful. And if you don't follow, there's a professor, I think, or an academic who tweets about her a lot, and I need to find out. Oh, Screwball Girl, I think.
Yeah.
Follow her. She has all the good Carole Lombard stuff on her Twitter.
Nice. Yeah, she is a fascinating person. She was a feminist. I mean, she went into like freelance in the 30s, and I guess she was the first Hollywood actor to do profit participation.
Mm-hmm.
Where she took a reduced salary in exchange for a cut of the gross, and also the rights to her image as well, and even like her own costume designer she always had with her. So she was very much in control at a time of the star system that didn't really allow for its stars to have much control.
Mm-hmm.
So good for you, Carole Lombard. Sad that we don't get to talk about you again. I know, truly. Like, who knows what else she could have done.
Carole in the 1970s, can you imagine? She would have just...
Oh my God.
Ugh, I'm sad now.
I'm very sad that you put this image in my mind.
I'm so sorry.
What could have been, truly.
Yeah.
I'm sure you could talk about this all day.
I know. Please stop me. We should move on.
Okay. Well, let's move on to an actress that I think you also have opinions about.
Mm-hmm.
Our final losing nominee of the year, and that is Miss Norma Shearer for Romeo and Juliet. So, We have been talking quite a bit about Norma Shearer on this show already. This is the fourth episode, fifth film that we're talking about for Norma. Like we talked about in the episode where she was nominated for The Bears of Wimpole Street, she is just firmly in her era of being the first lady of MGM, getting many of the great iconic roles, including in this case playing Juliet in Romeo and Juliet. Keeping in mind, she is 34 years old, playing a character who is supposed to be like 13, 14. I don't feel like I need to go into a big plot description for this. People know this story. She plays Juliet, star-crossed lovers. Not so great ending for either of them. Leslie Howard is playing Romeo, so they're reuniting on screen again. I would say that this adaptation, obviously it doesn't include everything, but it's generally faithful to the play, outside of the fact that we have people in their 30s and 40s playing teenagers. But Izzy, we have certainly discussed Norma Shearer before in the DMs.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Miss Norma as an actress before we get into this performance?
So what I'll say, to be nice, I guess, is that like
you don't have to be.
There are some people where I'm just like, okay, I get why people are fans of this person. Like they're bringing something to the table that isn't for me, but I totally see why other people love it. Norma Shearer is an actress that I literally cannot figure out what that thing is that people like. Like I don't understand what attracts people to her. I guess like I feel not much when I watch her perform, and I feel like that's a bad thing. So I'm just constantly like battling with the fact that she was extremely successful and defeated other people for roles, for awards, all of these sorts of things. So I don't know. I don't know what it is. It's just not clicking and I don't get it. She feels like very flat to me. So yeah, I guess I think going in, I already was sort of not feeling it just because of her, which is probably very bad and you shouldn't do that. I want to have an open mind, but I also, I mean, you're right. Like, and I know I just said I compliment the fact that all of these like women in their 30s were in this category, but like she was too old to play. Both of them were too old for these roles. And it does not work for me.
And for the record, Leslie Howard is 43.
Yes. And looks it.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, well, I've, again, talked about Norma quite a bit already, and what I've really sort of fallen into with her is just the sense that her performances can be good, and she seems well-trained. And in that respect, I say that this isn't really, like, something that feels like the Greta Garbo, Marlene Dietrich, even Carole Lombard type of thing, where it seems like they're just sort of destined to do this. It feels to me like Norma had to work for this to really get to be in these kinds of roles. And obviously she had the privilege of being married to Irving Thalberg, which we've talked about. But I feel like she has to put in more effort than some other actresses to really get to a certain point, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I just don't think there's like an innate natural charm there.
Right.
That's like very obvious. Because I mean, it's not like today where there's just so many celebrities that it's like you don't necessarily have to be the most charming person to be famous. Like back then,
Sure.
they're weeding everybody out. So when you're in the company of like a Greta Garbo, it's very obvious to tell like who's falling short. And that's just sort of how I feel, especially being at MGM at this time. It's like, ooh, I don't know.
You're sounding like Joan Crawford at this point. Just being like, Norma.
Exactly. Yes.
But
yeah,
as far as this performance, I feel like you got into it a little bit, but I assume didn't really do it for you.
it really didn't. I mean, I think it's like a combination of things, and I don't fully like blame her for that, honestly. Like these sort of period spectacles aren't always up my alley to begin with, and I think Romeo and Juliet is additionally a difficult play for me. It's just not one of my favorite Shakespeare plays. So yeah, it was very hard to get through. Again, far too long. Um, and I mean, I thought it was just very funny. Like even the opening scene that she's in, and she's like a pre-Disney princess, and like literally feeding a deer, which is just the funny. It's like it's so overly extravagant, like not fun enough to be camp, but like it could be with the right performer, you know?
Yeah, yeah. For me, I think it's pretty much more of the same from her. Although I do think she reaches a few high points towards the end of the film where I see a little bit of a spark during some of the more climactic moments. She just has a certain kind of nobility, I guess, with a hint of that early spunkiness that she had in some of her pre-code films. But she's also doing the thing where she's like tousling the hair when she gets stressed, and she's looking out into this non-existent audience. Just really, we've talked about like actresses who can adapt to film compared to the stage, and this really feels very stage bound to me. What she's doing, the big tearful proclamations, it's all here, and she's decent enough, but again, it's really hard to look past truly how wrong she is for this part. They're both too old, and really, in order to sell this idea that these two characters would make such a rash decision and get married, love at first sight kind of thing, and then kill themselves by the end, there has to be some level of like a immaturity. And even if I was just to look past the whole age thing, even in their performances, they don't seem like the kind of people who would do what they end up doing. And I feel like, especially if I were watching this at the time, having seen all these Norma Shearer performances and Leslie Howard performances up to that point, I just would not really believe them in these roles. It just feels like they're putting on Romeo and Juliet more so than really inhabiting the characters at all.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole thing just made me really want to see Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier and in Romeo and Juliet, which I think they did famously stage, and it did very poorly. But yeah, I was like, oh God. I think because also Leslie Howard, like to me, his characters are always very grounded. Like they're struggling with some sort of rationale. Like the whole conflict is like, how do they rationalize whatever feeling they're having? And it always sort of ends up, well, not always good, but there's like it's largely like bound to his maturity, like you were saying. And this just does not work for him either in that way.
Yeah. It just, for me, it feels like a step backwards for both of them. Even if Shakespeare is obviously challenging, and doing this show in order and going through Norma's performances in order, it just doesn't really compute with me that this is one of her late career nominations. I mean, I do think she is slightly improving as an actress over the course of that time, as much as I miss some of that early pre-code Norma. And this isn't necessarily bad, but she just has too much of that grand dame, MGM, nobility energy for this part at this stage in her career, quite frankly. So, I have to admit that for the most part, I'm not that impressed with her in this performance because, again, I've been watching so many of her performances, and she really does fall back on that very people pleaser kind of style that she always has, like that little bit of that bittersweet smile, and there's always that luminous quality, and that's all fine enough for playing this role. But she just doesn't really give off the impression of being a young woman who's just experiencing her first love. And I think her chemistry with Leslie Howard is fine, but not exactly lighting the audience on fire. I know this wasn't even a box office hit to begin with, but I think where she does at least interest me a little bit is towards the end when she has her big monologue before she takes the sleeping potion and she's deciding whether she should do it or not. I like some of the more hushed tones that she uses in that scene. I think it adds to the gravity of the story and what she's about to do and the way it sort of escalates. I just think she at least modulates that pretty well. And honestly, I don't know if this is a little blasphemous or not, but when I see a scene like that, I almost wonder what she could have done with another kind of Shakespeare part, like a Lady Macbeth, maybe. I feel like that could have been an interesting shade for her of getting to be a little more domineering, a little more villainous, instead of always having to play these kinds of dull sort of heroine types that she did over and over again. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's when, like, I think you're right. It's the moments where she's not trying to be doe-eyed and like a youthful sort of like naivete that you sort of need to have to play Juliet. Like when she can have those quiet moments that are just her by herself and she's not
exactly
like wooed by anybody, then it is a lot more effective for sure.
Yeah. The only other scene that I really noted for her is the scene where she realizes that Tybalt is dead, which I think is pretty effective, where she's really going through all the stages of grief and sort of figuring out what it means for her and Romeo. And we get more of the sort of crying while speaking thing that she does a lot, which I've been hot and cold on from Norma over these episodes. Didn't really bother me as much here just because the material is just inherently, theatrical. So I'd say her style can fit with this kind of film a little more than some others. But on the whole, this is not a performance or film that is worthy of the recognition that it got for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm gonna agree.
I would imagine you don't have any other thoughts on this.
Not particularly, no.
Yeah. Well, that's Norma. Sorry, Norma.
Sorry,
not
Norma.
one of your best. Well, let's get to our big winner of the year, Luise Rainer for The Great Ziegfeld. So, Luise Rainer, she was a German actress. She was discovered by MGM pretty early on in her career. She is yet another European actress who studios were hoping could be the next Greta Garbo. She did a film called Escapade, which was a big discovery moment for her. Although even after that, she said that she didn't really like doing interviews. She was pretty elusive, not unlike Greta Garbo, I guess, in that respect. Very insistent that she was an actor, not a movie star. And she was also marketed as being Viennese because there was some anti-German sentiment that was starting to grow in the mid-30s. But the very next role was The Great Ziegfeld. There was some studio squabbling over whether she should do the part. And it's very ironic that she wins Best Actress here because most of that squabbling is due to this part being supporting. I don't think there's a lot of ambiguity there. I think it's supporting. And Louis B. Mayer was saying that, like, she's a star now. She shouldn't be doing this supporting turn. And there's also the feeling that she didn't really look like the character she played, who was this real-life singer, Anna Held. But she did it, and obviously she made a huge impression and won the Oscar. And so to get to it, Anna Held, she was a stage performer who was married at one time to Florenz Ziegfeld, who's played here again, William Powell, having a great year. So she becomes a big star through her collaboration with him, and they get married, and then his eyes wander elsewhere, basically, and they get a divorce. And the last scene for her is this very tearful conversation on the phone where she wishes him well on his new marriage, even though she's clearly not really over him. So what do we think of our winner here, Luise Rainer in The Great Ziegfeld?
She's no Carole Lombard in My Man Godfrey. I'll say that.
Wow.
I think you're totally right. Like, this is absolutely not a lead role. Although, like, to be fair, a lot of Best Actress winners are not actually in lead roles. So
Okay, go off.
that's true. Okay, so Luise Rainer is another one, very similarly to Norma Shearer, where like I don't get it, and I'm also confused about the initial appeal. Respectfully, the way I would describe her acting is like, oh, just that sound effect, you know, like
wow.
There isn't really a word. It's just like a very like, oh, like a like a little sigh.
A labored sigh.
A labored sigh, yes.
Yes.
And that it doesn't really work for me personally. I know people really love that telephone scene, and I understand like the gravity of it, but I'm also like very enamored with Myrna Loy, so I'm just like, yes, we're done with her. Like we're into the Myrna era. Like it's all good.
So much like William Powell,
yes,
your eyes
exactly.
wandered over to Myrna Loy.
Yeah.
Fair.
So I think I'm definitely coming to this with the correct amount of biases to be confused as to why she won for this. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a very strange role. Like there are many parts, specifically like when we first meet her and she's sort of saying like, go away, don't go away, come back into the room, actually leave, to Ziegfeld. I honestly could not tell if it was meant to be played comedically. Like I think the tone is just a little strange to me. It doesn't quite work for me, but yeah, that's sort of where I'm at with it.
Yeah. So here's the thing. We'll get to The Good Earth next week. That is a performance I have major problems with for a variety of reasons, but I don't mind her here, actually. I think she's probably one of the better parts of the film for me. I watched it for the first time for the Best Picture series. It was one of the Best Picture winners I hadn't seen yet. Thought it was solid, kind of tedious, but I can understand why Reiner was thought of as a standout, because she does have a little bit of that fizzy energy that really makes that middle portion of the film interesting, and she's not in it for very much. You know, like we said, my friend Matthew Stewart over at Screen Time Central, according to his calculations, she's only in 19% of the film, and she has about 36 minutes of screen time in this 3-hour film. I don't think there's any doubt that she would be campaign supporting if this came out today, but I also think with the studio really wanting her to be a leading lady star, she was promoted to the lead category. And, you know, for those who like to argue, well, she's the female lead of the film, therefore she should be in lead, which is very dumb. Not every film has a true female lead. And with so many characters in this film as it is, the only actor you can really say is the lead is William Powell.
Yeah.
But regardless, I think she does have a few standout moments in that middle portion of the film. We'll get a little bit more into that phone scene in a bit between her and Ziegfeld, but one of my favorites is the part where Ziegfeld is first signing her on to, you know, work for him, and he's talking about how like this will get her so much exposure, and she's like, yes, but how much will you pay me? You know, and he keeps bringing up these things about how like she'll meet all these people, it might lead to other opportunities, and she's like, yes, but like how much will you pay me? Which I have to say, working in the business of like freelance journalism, very relatable.
Yeah,
but
I did like that part for sure.
Yeah, just saying.
Yeah.
But I feel like that's more of like a writing thing than her necessarily, but
yeah,
I think she does have some decent comedic timing in that scene, and just a nice energy, like I said, where she gets to be larger than life. I mean, it's a little too theatrical, perhaps with some of those labored sighs, like we were saying, for my own personal taste, but I think it actually does work kind of well in the context of the world of this film, which is, again, sort of like Romeo and Juliet, just inherently theatrical because it's full of these larger than life performers. Like Fanny Brice shows up at one point, so
Yes, I'm so thankful that I'm sure there's plenty of filmed documentation of her performances, but it's just really cool
yeah.
to see that pop up.
Yeah. Would have liked a supporting nomination for her as herself.
Yeah. Although it's very strange to hear someone say Sadie as a Fanny Brice and it's not Barbara Streisand.
That's true. But yeah, the performance, it doesn't really add up to much ultimately. Obviously, the telephone scene happens at the end, which I guess you could say probably the first time that we've come upon like the Oscar scene in terms of someone in this category at least having a true winning moment, where there was so much written about that scene. And she's so devastated that Ziegfeld has moved on, and she's just trying to wish him well, but she can't really help herself from crying, and she's very vulnerable. I think the hype behind that scene is a little overblown, to be honest. But, I mean, maybe that's just because I've seen similar types of things done with more nuance in general.
Yeah. And I think part of it is also like in the context of this group, like sort of what you're saying, there's always this Oscar moment, which is like stereotyped as a very teary monologue, and nobody else really like Norma does kind of at the end of Romeo and Juliet, but like this is really the only one of those that actually kind of stands out and is like decently performed. Like I'm not totally gonna diss it, but I think if you're sort of going from a more stereotypical perspective and looking for that moment that would really capture a voter's attention, it's like, oh yeah, of course that's the one. Like it's harder. I think that kind of scene just grips people more than the shower scene in My Man Godfrey,
Right. Yeah, it's just very inherently showy work. And I have to say, like, I don't know if this is sacrilege or not. Please just let me explain this before you immediately exit the call. There are elements to her performance, at least in scenes like this and others, that feels like it's sort of laying the foundation for the kinds of performances that like a Meryl Streep would give. Let me explain.
I actually see that though. I don't think that's controversial.
Okay. Keeping in mind, Meryl is leagues better as an actress.
Yeah.
And obviously she's had many decades to show that she can do just about anything. But just in terms of an actress who has like a chameleonic quality to her, who can do different accents, and she can have like that bubbly quality that makes her just really irresistible as a movie star, but that can also just break your heart. Plus, they sort of just resemble each other on top of that, which is where I first started.
Yeah.
Where I first started, like, the snowball of this idea. But I just think in the sense of, like, what can really impress an audience on an acting level and just what the industry sees as, capital G-A, good acting. Like, this is the kind of thing that they're like, oh, now that's impressive. Like, look what she did there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sort of thing.
This is actually very random, but it's so funny. On my video about Anna Magnani, I got so many comments that were like, she looks exactly like Meryl Streep. And I was like, what? Like, that was the most confusing. And it wasn't like isolated. It was a lot of people. I was very confused by that and still am. But I see Luise Rainer though.
Okay. Well, yeah, I don't know. Maybe for Anna, just like the long face sort of thing. I don't know, but that is a stretch.
Yeah, I did not get it, but
yeah,
people see what they see. Who knows?
Exactly. But let's just transition into the discussion of how she won this. So she didn't expect to win, so she stayed home. But then Louis B. Mayer found out about the fact that she won this and sent a car to come and get her and bring her to the ceremony. But she did win the New York Film Critics Best Actress Award before this, so she at least had that. the first time we can actually talk about the New York Film Critics as a precursor. Won't be the last as far as lining up with Oscar. There's actually some good tea from the Oscars where apparently this is from Inside Oscar. Gladys George was there, obviously, as a nominee, and she told Carole Lombard in the bathroom, who was also there, that she already heard that they lost to Luise Rainer before it was even announced. And Carole was like, "No, I don't know. We'll see." But Gladys said, and this is a direct quote, she said, "I thought I might be a dark horse, but Luise Rainer won. She's going to win next year, too. Look at the reviews."
Oh.
Mayer's trying to build her up and thought an Oscar might help. And he's trying to get rid of Shearer.
Yeah.
So Gladys had all the tea.
Gladys knew. Gladys was in.
Her mind is powerful because Louise did win the next year.
And I mean, I think it's like get rid of Norma, but also get rid of Garbo.
Yeah. And then Carole Lombard was like, I don't know if Louis B. Mayer still has like that much influence in response to that. But anyway, here we are.
And here we are. Carole was wrong for once.
Yeah, but I just thought that was the very funny sort of knowing quote from Gladys here. But why do we think she ended up winning? Maybe we already talked about it, the fact that she had an Oscar scene. But do you think there was something in the air about like, oh, here's this fresh, interesting European actress who's come over and wow, what a discovery kind of thing, and it all culminated in this win?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think very much Louis B. Mayer was like trying to make fetch happen here. Like,
God.
From what I can tell, because I didn't do a video specifically about this race, but I did the next year with The Good Earth. And from everything that I read for that video, it was essentially like he was heavily invested, like convinced, absolutely sure that she was going to be the next big thing, because he was so frustrated with a lot of his other stars. And he was like sort of getting the sense that they would have to start cycling out, like a lot of the women who'd been there during the silent era. So he brought her over and was again just trying to make fetch happen, and she was eventually, pretty quickly started pushing back against it, and it sort of backfired on him. But I think that's a big part of it, honestly. It's just like who's in your corner, especially in the 30s, is like very, very important. And I know like MGM had a very successful decade in the 30s, pushing their own winners. So I just think that's a huge part of it, to beat Carole for that performance. Makes sense in a lot of ways, but just in terms of like genre and like that big scene. But I think it's also just like politics truly can carry you over the edge for sure.
Yeah. And again, even from reading Inside Oscar, the way that some columnists were even writing about the race was very much like, oh, MGM, what are they going to do? Are they going to back Norma, or they're going to back the new thing, Luise Rainer? And like, what is Warner Brothers going to do? And it was just almost like even more political than is even written about today in this very cynical way.
Yeah. And I think that's also true of the next year as well, because I think The Good Earth was Irving Thalberg's last film. And so that was given a huge push as a way of like dedicating it to him. Like, oh, you have to vote for The Good Earth because of Irving.
Honor the man.
Exactly.
Honor the film.
So I think that ended up doing almost like disproportionately well for that reason as well. So
yeah, but it is just of note to me that, again, she only has 36 minutes of screen time in a 3-hour film, and you compare it to literally all of the other nominees who are just unambiguously leads of their films, who have pretty much all of them have like 50 to an hour of screen time, and they just weren't able to do it. I wonder if it's just like a true apple in a barrel of oranges situation. I don't know.
Yeah, very strange. Perhaps I've made clear, never loved this win.
Yes.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it will endlessly confuse me, I'm sure, till the end of time.
I mean, obviously, there's the fact that the film was also winning Best Picture, which
Hmm.
typically tends to help in general, but not
Yeah. I
always.
mean, I think it's interesting to think about the Great Ziegfeld like in the same bucket as like a lot of the films we're making now. Like it feels like it's sort of appealing to the same nostalgic like
Hmm.
show business culture vibe that we have going on with a lot of movies now. Like pretty
Sure.
much like half of best actress movies are of like some show business figure at this point. So it's like it is sort of just playing, I guess we're still attracted to stories like that of like these figures that we recognize and making them human in some way.
Right.
There's that too, I guess.
She is an actor playing a performer, which is something that I think a lot of industry people can understand and be like, "Oh, I get this. I understand the motivations and everything," compared to other characters.
I'm also
So,
interested in Myrna Loy playing Billy Burke, like as a friend of Billy Burke's. Like they were in a movie together like the next year.
yeah.
That's fun. Like what was that like? This is
What
when I
was
wish
that
there were talk
conversation?
shows back then, you know?
I know, right?
Yeah.
Oof, wild. Yeah, so I think that pretty much sums that up. We do have a handful of questions that we got from Twitter, and then we'll close it out when we discuss the why Carole Lombard was the runner-up. So let's get to these questions. First, from our friend Chels, who said, "How wild does Theodora go?"
It's a great question. I don't think that
Pretty damn
wild,
wild.
but like pretty wild.
Yeah,
Maybe like
I mean,
1936
listen,
wild.
yeah, yeah. For context, very wild.
Yeah.
Like she straight up ruined a few marriages. Definitely scandalized an entire town. Like I'd say that's decently
Yeah,
wild.
good for her.
Good for her.
Hmm.
It's one of the good for her movies.
Yeah.
This is from Jackson DeStefano. Is Valiant truly the word for Carrie, or is that an overstatement?
Oh, wow. What do you think? What's a good word?
Loving these questions.
Yeah.
Um, I would say it's a slight overstatement, to be honest.
Hmm.
I don't know if valiant is the correct word. I'm trying to think of a different word.
Present. She is there.
Present is the word for Carrie.
I don't
I don't
know.
know.
I don't
I
know
don't
what the
think
right
she's
word
that
is.
easy to sum up. I think she's just Carrie.
Yeah.
Let's call the movie
Carrie.
Carrie.
Carrie is the word for Carrie.
Wow, mind blowing. All right. Let's move on to Zeta Short. Apparently, the 1936 version of Romeo and Juliet was meant to be radical and different because it views the story through the eyes of Juliet. Do you think this reinterpretation of the story makes the film feel fresh and exciting, or is it too generic?
I honestly didn't even notice. I mean, this also could be because I like have not thought about this play in a really long time, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I really don't know how to answer that.
I didn't really either, but like looking back on it, I suppose she does have decent long monologues to her that feel very focused on her. I think just like subconsciously doing this show, I paid closer attention to her than I did for anyone else. Like Leslie Howard, I just didn't even really like it barely registered for me what he did.
Yeah.
That like I guess it made it feel slightly more interesting, but also still generic because I don't think Norma Shearer was up to the task. So there
Mhm.
you go.
Yeah.
This is from Christoph N. Is there a world in which Irving Thalberg's death could have carried Norma Shearer to a win in a sympathy vote? Or is it unlikely that sentiment like that was a major influence in 1930s Oscar voting?
Hmm. Well, he wasn't dead yet, was he?
I'm going to do a quick fact check on when he died.
Yeah. But
Hmm.
maybe. Who knows? I mean, it seems like that was the case for the next year.
Yeah, he died September 14th, 1936. So he was dead
Mm.
by the time the ceremony came around.
There you go. Who knows?
So, like, I think it's possible, but I also think there wasn't like a real urgency to reward her again.
I wonder if it
which is
almost
probably
like
why.
let them off the hook a little bit, you know, because it's like,
Go on.
um, because I just feel like his success gave her a certain prominence, and maybe that's a little unfair to characterize it that way, but it was certainly like sold that way, that like she was sort of where she was and given a lot of opportunities that she had because of him. And maybe
Yeah.
if she was sort of coming to a point where she wasn't as desirable within the studio, it's like if there's not him there to sort of appease and keep happy, then there's less pressure to reward her.
Yes, I could definitely see that sadly being the case, even though that's pretty cynical.
It really is, but also like it's MGM, so.
But yeah, it's very sadly realistic. Oof. This is from Marcel. Should Luise Rainer have been nominated in the freshly founded supporting category instead of lead? I mean,
Right. I mean, like
I would think so.
realistically, yes.
Yeah.
But I think this is a huge problem though. Like I think because
Mhm.
I'm working on, oh, when is this going in?
This is going up in
Oh,
November,
great. Okay. So
like late November.
great.
So
So I'm working on
you're
a
probably
Deborah
good.
Carr video right now.
Ah,
And I think like
interesting.
she and Myrna Loy have like a similar problem, which is like these leading women who are just like so famous and beloved that they could not conceivably, like, because of how fame was kind of defined at the time, like it wouldn't have been proper for them to be supporting, even though they should have been.
Right.
And so like that is, I think, this where you were saying, as you were saying earlier, Mare was like, oh, well, she's going to be very famous. Like she's going to be of this caliber and therefore she should be in this, which isn't, I think, how we think about things
Right.
anymore.
Right. But it's just funny because typically the case has been like she's not a star yet. Like I would say that she was, I don't know, maybe this was a big stars born moment for Luise Rainer to the extent that she really felt like, here I am, I'm the new leading lady of the day. That it's no ambiguity, she's going to be in lead.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But it seems like in some cases, like supporting is almost like the audition to be in lead in some of the earlier years. But
Mm-hmm.
I'll just say I think she would have been a better winner than Gail Sondergaard. I'll say that much.
Okay, that's true. Yup.
Because that is
True.
not a good performance.
Yeah.
See more of our thoughts on the Best Picture episode that we did for 1936 for more thoughts on why that is.
Yeah.
This is from Gabe Guarin, who said, why only one nomination for Jean Arthur? Why not one for Mr. Deeds? Obviously, I love Jean Arthur. We'll talk about her when she got her one and only nomination for The More the Merrier. We talked about her a lot in this era for the Best Picture series. I just think she made it look too easy, quite frankly.
Yeah. She's very, very good.
She is. I also remember even reading that she was not seen as quote-unquote cooperative.
Right. That's what I was going to say. I think it was like, it's
Yeah.
hard to, I think it would be hard for a studio to be like, yeah, we're going to put all our like eggs in the basket that's like afraid to speak in public. Like, which like is obviously, they probably didn't treat her well, but I don't know. I don't ever get the impression that she was sort of ever put in the same leading league as like a Norma Shearer or a Carole Lombard. You know, like I always kind of get the impression that she's just constantly overlooked even in her time.
Always underappreciated.
Yeah.
Which is partly why I've sort of latched on to her. This is from, well, we've gotten a few questions about Dodsworth and the fact that Ruth Chatterton was snubbed. Andrew Carden said thoughts on why Ruth Chatterton missed the cut for Dodsworth despite being a prior nominee and her film co-leading in nominations. Hard to say.
Yeah.
I do think from what I've seen of her, I mean, this is her crowning achievement for sure. Certainly better than either of her nominations. I mean, just from doing research and also looking at this lineup, she actually decided to leave Hollywood pretty shortly after this because she was getting older and she felt that the roles weren't really there anymore. The studios didn't really give her much attention anymore. So maybe that sentiment was also present within the Academy as well, that like maybe she's past her prime in some ways.
Yeah, I'd agree
More,
with that. I mean, I
yeah,
think
more of
like
that.
with the exception of Gladys George, I sort of see the political motivations behind all of the nominees.
Yeah.
So it's like who's gonna fill in that like wild card spot? And
Hmm.
I
Right.
guess she didn't make the cut, unfortunately.
Yeah. A little more of a focus on those stars, and
Yeah.
even younger stars, even though, again, like you were saying, these are women in their 30s. Maybe they felt like Ruth Chatterton had gotten her due back in the super early years of the Academy.
Hmm.
We're focusing on other people now.
Yeah.
Of course, that didn't factor in with Norma because she's she's been nominated all along, but she's obviously in a very privileged position.
Right.
But Eric Maxwell Brunn said, "Would you have nominated Ruth Chatterton? If so, who would you knock out?" Yes, I would, and I would kick out Norma Shearer. Pretty simple.
Sure. Yeah. There you go.
And finally, from Mr. Autumn Man, William Wyler goes on to be a powerhouse director of Best Actress winning and nominated performances. Why do the women stars of his pictures, Dodsworth and these three, miss? Should any of them have made it into the category?
These three is a very strange film. I think that's more of like an adaptation problem than like a direction
Yeah.
problem.
Yes. The only real performance from that is that I remember is Bonita Granville, who was nominated in supporting.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, obviously, I would again nominate Ruth Chatterton for sure, but
Yeah.
I don't know if I would have nominated Miriam Hopkins. Sorry, Miriam. Again,
Yeah.
I feel like it's a tough break for you, but
Yeah.
or Merle Oberon, I don't think either.
I
So
don't either.
yeah, yep. All right. Well, let's get to our final segment where we discuss, basically in this case, since we can't guess who the runner-up was, why we think the runner-up was what it was. So Carole Lombard was revealed to be the runner-up. Norma Shearer was third place. Do you have theories on why the two of them were maybe singled out more than Gladys and Irene?
So before, when you said, "Oh, we were gonna talk about the runner-up," I was like, "Oh, was it Norma?" And then I got embarrassed that I didn't guess it right, but she was third, so that's okay.
Right.
I almost got it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think with Norma, there's definitely political things to think about, but I also think there's just like those big sweeping dramas that are just like so Oscar-y that it's like, of course you loved it. With Carol, I don't know. I mean, it seems like I mean, I guess like the maybe a little naive part of me is like, did they just actually understand that this was a great performance? Maybe. I hope so.
That's a very innocent take.
I know,
love
I
it.
know it is. It's just me dreaming.
Yes.
Um,
It's just because she was that good.
she was that good, but that's
Yeah.
also why she didn't win, so it's fine.
Mm. Yeah.
I think it's that. I think it's also just like a recognition that there's potential in her stardom that they were starting to really understand in a more concrete way after 20th Century and My Man Godfrey. It's like a vote is a lot of the time an investment in the future.
Yeah.
And I could definitely see people thinking that way of her.
I think that's right. And I think also the Academy clearly loved My Man Godfrey. Not enough to get into Best Picture for some bizarre reason I still don't understand, but she was really, yeah, I mean, she was peaking at this time in her career. I do wonder if the presence of Irene Dunne may have had an impact as far as, lighter performances, comedy performances, not like a super clear alternative to Luise Rainer between the two. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Splitting the vote argument.
Definitely splitting the vote. And the fact that both of them were not signed full time to a studio is, I think, a big one.
Oh, yeah. That's sadly probably a major factor in that as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, Norma Shearer, obviously politically minded, is the general reason probably why she got in. Plus, the fact that it is a more traditional old guard kind of a pick compared to pretty much anyone else here,
Mm-hmm.
I think definitely played a factor there for her. But I'm glad to know that at least in this race, Carole Lombard came close enough to an Oscar to be a runner-up, even though she didn't get the actual Oscar.
Mm-hmm.
At least she got to that position, which is nice. I don't know.
Yeah. Did they ever give her like an honorary, like posthumous award or anything? Do you know?
I don't think so.
That's dumb. Wow.
Nope. But she got a star on the Walk of Fame.
Oh, wow.
Yes. In 1960. Yeah. Her 2 awards on IMDb. My Man Godfrey, Best Actress, star on the Walk of Fame.
Wow. That's
it.
so...
Yeah.
Oh, it's disappointing.
Yes. Well, Carole Lombard, you are still a legend, and even if you got this nomination, you were the runner-up. You were still underappreciated in your time. So
yes.
Let this episode be a tribute to you. So there you go.
There you go.
All right. Well, Izzy, we did it.
You did it.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Another fabulous discussion.
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure, and I truly had a great time. So thank you.
Good. Yes. And of course, you are more than welcome down the road, whichever lineup you want. You can take your pick.
Thank you so much.
Unless it's already taken. Yes. But where can people find more of you on the internet?
My YouTube channel is called Be Kind Rewind. And on Twitter, I'm BK Rewind. On Instagram, I'm BK_Rewind.
Very good. Highly recommend you follow, especially if you're following along with this series. You can look back on some of her older Best Actress videos, which are very good and very well researched. So thank you all so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson, and the podcast is at Oscar Runner-Up on Twitter. I'm on Instagram at @AndTheRunnerUpIs. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/AndTheRunnerUpIs, where you can hear a whole bunch of bonus episodes for a small monthly fee. And this is the last main show episode in November, which means that on December 1st, I will return to talk about the Best Actress race of 1937, a lineup I very much enjoy. The nominees were Irene Dunne again for The Awful Truth, Greta Garbo for Camille, Janet Gaynor for A Star is Born, Luise Rainer again for The Good Earth, and Barbara Stanwyck for Stella Dallas, with the winner being Luise Rainer, going back to back. So that is what to watch for December 1st. Thank you again, Izzy.
Thank you.
And with that, I will bid you all adieu.